Rain swallowed the streets of Seoul. A pastry student from across stood between a dying man and a loaded gun. She had never thrown a punch in her life. But when she whispered 4 words, the most feared crime boss in the city stepped back. Subscribe, because those 4 words changed everything. I see you clearly. Before I tell you how we got there, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever looked someone dangerous in the eye and chosen not to run? Your answer is going to mean something by the end of this story. My name is Zara Mensah. And the first thing you need to know about me is that I am not extraordinary. I'm the 3rd daughter of a seamstress and a retired school teacher from Tema, Ghana. I grew up in a house where the electricity cut out twice a week, where my mother sewed until midnight to pay school fees, where my father read us novels by candlelight because he believed stories were the one thing poverty couldn't take. I was not supposed to amount to much, according to the women in my mother's church. Too quiet. Too dreamy. Too obsessed with baking when I should have been studying something practical. But I had this gift. This ridiculous, impractical gift for making things with my hands. Pastries, bread, sugar sculptures so delicate people were afraid to eat them. My mother called it a waste. My father called it a language. He said, Zara, every person speaks in the thing they do best. You speak in sweetness. Don't let anyone tell you that's not worth something. He died the year I got accepted to the Seoul Culinary Arts Institute on a partial scholarship. I almost didn't go. The scholarship covered tuition, but Seoul is expensive in a way that laughs at you when you try to budget. I worked 3 jobs in Accra for 8 months before I had enough to survive 1 semester. I arrived in Mapogu, Seoul, in late October, carrying 2 suitcases and my father's worn copy of Ama Ada Edu's collected poems. Seoul in autumn is cinematic. It looks like someone hired a set designer and said, make it look like a dream that could turn into a nightmare at any moment. The leaves are the color of fire. The streets glow with neon. And everyone moves like they are running somewhere important, like stopping might cost them everything. I felt invisible the moment I landed. It happened in my 3rd week. A small, brutal moment that would plant a seed in soil I didn't know was being prepared. I was at a high-end patisserie in Itaewon, the kind of place where the croissants cost more than my daily food budget because my instructor had assigned us to document the lamination technique of their signature pastry. I wasn't there to eat. I was there with my notebook and my phone camera, standing respectfully near the display case, taking notes. A floor manager, young, sharp-suited, efficient, walked up to me and said in clipped English, "This area is for paying customers only." I explained I was a culinary student. I had my institute ID. I showed it to him. He looked at it the way people look at something they've already decided is fake. "I'm going to need you to step outside," he said, loud enough for the other customers to hear. I felt the heat rise in my face. The particular burning shame of being made into a spectacle. I stepped outside. I stood on the pavement in the cold and I cried, not loudly, just the quiet, furious tears of someone who has been reminded, once again, that the world has a certain category ready for them. Then I heard a voice. "You should have stayed." He was leaning against a black car parked at the curb. Gray coat. Dark trousers, a stillness about him that made everything around him seem to be moving too fast. He was Korean, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of face that had clearly been handsome once and had become something more interesting since, harder, more complicated, like marble that had survived weather. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't name. Not pity. Not amusement. Something more like recognition. "You had every right to be there," he said. His English was precise, slightly formal, like someone who learned it from books before people. "I know," I said, wiping my face quickly. "Then why did you leave?" I didn't have an answer that didn't make me sound like a coward, so I said nothing. He looked at the patisserie window, then back at me. "What were you studying in there?" "Lamination technique. For croissants." Something shifted in his expression. Subtle. Like a door opening 1 centimeter. "My mother used to make a Ghanaian pastry. Chin chin. She learned from a woman in Lagos in the 80s. She said the technique was close to lamination, layering patience into the dough." I stared at him. "Your mother learned to make chin chin?" "She was a diplomat's wife for 20 years. She learned everything from everyone." He paused. She passed away 2 years ago. The grief in his voice was so controlled it almost wasn't there. Almost. He nodded once. My name is Ryu Seonghoon. Zara Mensah. He handed me a business card. It said nothing except his name and a phone number. No company. No title. Just existence. If you want to document that technique properly, he said, my chef trained under the original owner of that patisserie. I can arrange access. Then he got in his car and drove away, and I stood on the pavement holding his card, wondering what had just happened. I Googled his name that night. I wish I hadn't. Or maybe I'm glad I did. Ryu Seonghoon, 34. Heir to and current head of the Ryu Syndicate, one of the 3 organized crime networks that controlled the shadow economy of Seoul's northern districts. Protection, logistics, import networks that didn't appear in any official ledger. A man the police knew about and couldn't touch. A man that other dangerous men were careful around. The article I found was 3 years old. The headline read, "Who is the ghost of Gangbuk?" There was one photograph. He was standing outside a courthouse in the gray coat, looking at the camera with that same unreadable expression he'd shown me on the pavement. I put my phone down. Then I picked it up and saved his number anyway. He did arrange access to the kitchen. He did it without fanfare. One morning a week later, my instructor received a call, and I was quietly granted a tower observation session in that very patisserie. I never asked how. He never explained. We started meeting for coffee. Not romantic, not at first, just 2 people who were each, in their own way, more alone than they appeared. He came to my small studio apartment once and stood in front of my shelf of books the way my father used to, slowly, reading each spine like a sentence. Ama Ada Edu, he said, pulling out my father's copy. You know her? I studied literature at Yonsei before. He stopped. Before things changed. Before you took over. He put the book back carefully. Yes. Do you ever regret it? I asked. The room went very quiet. He turned to look at me, and I could see him deciding whether to be honest or careful. I watched the decision happen in real time across his face. Every day, he said. And also no. Because the alternative was leaving people who depended on my family without protection. And I wasn't willing to do that. So you became the monster to keep the wolves out. That is a very literary way to say it. My father was a literature teacher. He sat down. First time he'd ever sat down in my apartment. Something about that felt significant. What would he think of me? Seonghoon asked. He would say you were a tragic figure, I said. But he'd also say that tragic figures have choices right up until the moment they don't. I haven't told anyone that in 11 years, he said quietly. That I regret it. It was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had early class and I was still in my uniform, white chef's jacket, flower on my sleeve, when my phone rang at 10 p.m. with a number I didn't recognize. It was one of Seonghoon's men. Terse, frightened in that specific way that people are frightened when they're used to being the ones who cause fear in others. Miss Mensah. Mr. Ryu needs you at the warehouse in Songbuk. Now. A pause. Because there's a man with a gun and Mr. Ryu won't move, and he said to call the woman with the flower on her jacket. I took a taxi. I know that was not a sensible decision. But here is the thing about watching your father read novels by candlelight for 20 years, you develop a stubborn belief that people are redeemable. That the story isn't over until it's over. Inside, a large space, half empty. Seonghoon standing perfectly still in the center. Across from him, a younger man, early 20s, shaking, holding a gun in both hands with the desperate energy of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was now discovering it felt nothing like the rehearsal. You destroyed my family, he screamed. My father is dead because you. My mother has nothing. I have nothing. Seonghoon was not flinching, not pleading. He was watching the young man with that same unreadable expression, and I suddenly understood what it meant. It wasn't coldness. It was grief that had nowhere left to go. I walked in. What's your name? I asked the young man. He blinked. The gun wavered. No one had asked him that. Jinho, he said. Lee Jinho. I know, I said. I know. My father was a good man too, and the world didn't protect him the way it should have. And I have been angry about that every single day since I lost him. My voice broke. I let it. But Jinho, pulling that trigger tonight doesn't bring your father back. It just means two families are destroyed instead of one. You can shoot him, I said. Or you can let me take you somewhere warm and feed you, because you look like you haven't eaten properly in weeks, and then tomorrow we figure out what your mother actually needs. Real help. The kind that lasts. The gun came down. He sank to his knees and sobbed, and I went to him and I held his head against my shoulder right there on the warehouse floor while all of Seonghoon's men stood frozen like they were watching something they didn't have a category for. Later, outside, Seonghoon stood beside me in the cold. His hands were in his pockets and he was looking at the river. You could have died, he said. So could you. I'm used to it. That's not something a person should be used to, I said. I haven't been seen, he said quietly. In a very long time. I have been feared and negotiated with and avoided and respected out of terror. But I haven't been, he stopped. Seen, I finished. I see you clearly. All of it. And I'm still here. That was when he knelt. Not in proposal. Not in performance. He just knelt, right there on the wet ground by the river, like something in him finally gave way. I didn't say anything. I just put my hand on his head the way my mother used to do for me, the old gesture. The Ghanaian one, the one that means I am not leaving. Things don't become simple after a moment like that. Life is not a movie that cuts to credits when the emotions peak. He started coming to the Culinary Institute. Not inside. He'd wait across the street with terrible coffee from a convenience store and walk me back after late sessions. My classmates noticed. Nobody asked. But there were people who watched Seonghoon who didn't like what they were seeing. A man in his position becoming softer, more visible, linked to a foreign woman, it was read as vulnerability. One evening, I came back to my apartment and knew immediately someone had been inside. Nothing was taken. Nothing was broken. But things had been moved, subtly, the way you move things when you want someone to know you were there. Seonghoon was in my apartment within 20 minutes of me calling him. You need to leave Seoul, he said. No, I sat down at my kitchen table. Sit down, Seonghoon. He sat. Because apparently even crime bosses who have been feared their entire adult lives sit down when I use that particular voice. So the choice is between my safety and your humanity, I said. That's the actual choice. I won't choose your life over my humanity, he said finally. I won't make you a sacrifice for my peace of mind. Then let's solve this together. What followed was the most unusual 2 weeks of my life. Seonghoon and I sitting at my kitchen table late into the night, me with flour on my hands, him with his phone and his network, building something together. He had power. I had something different, the ability to walk into rooms where his presence would cause panic, to speak to people who feared him, to find the human thing in every corner of his world and name it out loud. It worked. Not completely. Not cleanly. But enough. That was 4 years ago. I finished my program. I opened a small patisserie in Mapogu, the same neighborhood where I arrived with 2 suitcases and no one. It's called Tema, after the city where I grew up. The croissants are very good. I spent enough time being humiliated in that Itaewon patisserie to make sure of that. Seonghoon is not a saint. I want to be honest with you about that. He is still the head of something I don't fully understand and probably never will. He still makes decisions I don't ask about. He still has that stillness in him that means violence is a language he speaks fluently. But he is also the man who reads my father's Ama Ada Edu poems aloud to our son at bedtime. He is the man who built a foundation in my father's name that gives scholarships to culinary students from West Africa. Not for redemption. He never uses that word. He says, your father believes stories were the one thing poverty couldn't take. I want to make sure more stories get told. Every day. And also, not the parts that led here. And that boy in the warehouse, Lee Jinho, who came in with a gun and left with a meal, he's one of my junior pastry chefs now. He's 26. He has his mother's eyes. He makes the best chin-chin in Seoul. Some stories don't end. They just become the place where the next story begins. If this story moved something in you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that being seen is not a weakness. It is the bravest thing you can offer another person. Drop a comment. Have you ever seen someone and chosen to say so? Even when it cost you something. Stay soft. Stay brave. even when the world tells you those two things can't live in the same body. Until next time.